Imagine you're driving home after a long shift at work. You're tired, you just want to get to your driveway. But suddenly, you see flashing blue lights in your rearview mirror. You pull over, assuming it is just a minor speeding ticket or a broken taillight. The officer approaches, takes your license and registration, and walks back to his cruiser. You sit there waiting. 5 minutes pass, then 10 minutes, then 15. You look in your side mirror and see a second police vehicle pull up. This one has the words canine unit printed on the side. The first officer has stopped writing your ticket. He's standing by the cruiser, chatting with the canine handler. They're looking at your car. Suddenly, they start walking the dog around your vehicle. The dog sits near your trunk. The officer taps on your window and says, "The dog alerted to narcotics and they are going to search your car." You know you do not have any drugs. You know you are innocent. But now you're standing on the side of the highway while they tear your upholstery apart. What just happened? And more importantly, did the police just break the law to find a reason to search you? I'm Sarah. For over 15 years, I've studied police procedure, criminal law, and Supreme Court rulings. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to protect yourself when a police canine gets involved. We are going to break down exactly what police are allowed to do with drug dogs during a traffic stop. We will look at the specific phrases you can use to protect your rights, and we will expose the one critical mistake that most drivers make that accidentally gives the police permission to ruin their lives. Let me tell you about a driver named Marcus. Marcus was pulled over for a legitimate reason, a broken taillight. This is what the law calls the mission of the traffic stop. Under the Constitution, a traffic stop is a seizure of your person. The government is restricting your freedom of movement. Because it is a seizure, it must be reasonable in duration. The Supreme Court has ruled that a traffic stop can only last as long as is reasonably necessary to complete the mission of the stop. What is the mission? It is checking your license, checking your registration and insurance, checking for outstanding warrants, and writing the actual citation or warning. That's it. Once those tasks are finished, or once they should have been finished, the legal authority for the stop expires. In Marcus's case, the officer walked away with his ID, but instead of writing the ticket, he waited for the canine unit to arrive. This is where the Supreme Court drew a line in the sand in the Rodriguez case. The court held that police cannot extend a traffic stop by even a single minute just to wait for a drug dog. This is a massive deal. Before this ruling, courts used to allow small delays, calling them de minimis intrusions. They basically said, "What's another 5 or 10 minutes if it helps catch criminals?" The Supreme Court said no. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote that the authority of the seizure ends when tasks tied to the traffic infraction are or reasonably should have been completed. So in Marcus's case, when the officer stopped writing the ticket to chat with the canine handler, he likely violated Marcus's constitutional rights. But here's the catch. This protection only applies if the police do not have something called reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion is a specific legal standard. It's more than a hunch, but less than proof. It means the officer can point to specific, articulable facts that suggest criminal activity is afoot. If Marcus was shaking uncontrollably, smelled like marijuana, or had a weapon in plain view, the officer would have reasonable suspicion. If the officer has reasonable suspicion of a completely different crime, he can extend the stop. He can hold you there until the dog arrives. But if Marcus was just sitting there calmly and the only issue was a broken taillight, the officer cannot stall. This brings us to the most dangerous part of the encounter, the alert. Let's say the officer violated the law and brought the dog anyway. The dog walks around the car and alerts. Usually, this means the dog sits, barks, or scratches at a specific spot. Legally, a positive alert from a trained canine provides immediate, probable cause to search the entire vehicle. Probable cause is a higher standard than reasonable suspicion. It means there's a fair probability that evidence of a crime will be found. Once the dog alerts, the officer doesn't need a warrant. He doesn't need your permission. He can open your trunk, your glove box, and check under your seats. But wait, Marcus didn't have any drugs. Why did the dog alert? Studies have shown that drug dogs can have high error rates. Sometimes they alert to residual odors from someone who sat in the car days ago. Sometimes they alert because they're picking up on cues from their handler, a phenomenon called the clever hands effect. The handler expects to find drugs, so the dog alerts to please the handler. In the case of Florida versus Harris, the Supreme Court ruled that if a dog is certified and trained, courts will generally presume the alert is reliable. This means you can't argue with the officer on the side of the road about the dog's accuracy. If the dog alerts, the search is happening. Do not physically resist. Do not try to block the officer. If you physically interfere, you'll be arrested for obstruction, even if the search itself turns out to be illegal. The place to fight a bad canine search is in the courtroom, not on the highway. So what should Marcus have done differently? How do you handle the situation in the real world? Here's the step-by-step playbook. First, minimize the duration of the stop yourself. Have your license, registration, and insurance ready before the officer gets to the window. Don't engage in unnecessary chit-chat. The more you talk, the more time you give them to look for suspicious behavior. Second, watch the clock. If the officer takes your ID and disappears for an unusually long time, you need to pay attention. If you see him sitting in his car doing nothing or waiting around, he might be stalling for a canine. Third, ask the magic question. Officer, am I free to go? If he says no, ask, Officer, what is the reason for my continued detention? If he says he's waiting for a canine unit and he hasn't handed you your ticket yet, this is a red flag. You can politely say, Officer, I believe the purpose of this traffic stop is resolved, and I would like to be on my way. You're establishing a verbal record that you are not consenting to the delay. This is crucial for your lawyer later. Many people accidentally consent to the delay. The officer might say, Hey, you don't mind hanging tight for a few minutes while we run the dog around car? If you say, Sure, or I have nothing to hide, you just gave up your Rodriguez rights. You consented to the extension of the stop. Never consent to the delay. Never consent to the search. Use the phrase, I do not consent to any searches. Say it clearly, say it respectfully. If the officer searches anyway, your lawyer can file a motion to suppress evidence. This is where the exclusionary rule comes in. The exclusionary rule is a legal principle that says evidence obtained in violation of the Constitution cannot be used against you in court. If the judge agrees that the officer stalled the traffic stop illegally to wait for the dog, everything the dog found, the drugs, the money, the weapon, could be thrown out. It effectively kills the case. But this only works if you didn't consent to the delay. Let's address a common myth. People think, if the dog alerts, I'm doomed. Not necessarily. Remember Rodriguez, if the detention before the alert was illegal, the alert itself is fruit of the poisonous tree. Because the police had no right to hold you that long, they had no right to run the dog, and therefore, the evidence is inadmissible. However, there are exceptions you must know. Exception 1, the plain view or plain smell. If the officer smells burnt marijuana in a state where it's illegal, when he first approaches your window, he already has probable cause. He doesn't even need the dog at that point. Exception 2, nervousness is not enough, usually. Courts have consistently held that mere nervousness is not enough to justify extending a stop. Most people are nervous when talking to police. However, if you're shaking, sweating profusely, and giving conflicting answers about where you are coming from, that combination can build reasonable suspicion. This is why keeping your mouth shut is generally the best policy. I prefer not to answer any questions is a valid legal response. Let's recap the key takeaways for your safety. Number 1. A traffic stop must end when the ticket is written. Police cannot delay you just to wait for a dog unless they have reasonable suspicion. Number 2, never consent to an extension of the stop. If an officer asks if you mind waiting, the answer is, I would like to leave as soon as the citation is issued. Number 3, if a dog alerts, the officer has probable cause to search. Do not fight it physically. Your defense happens later in court. Number 4, film the encounter if it's safe to do so. Having video proof that the officer sat doing nothing for 20 minutes while waiting for the canine can be the evidence that wins your case. In the legal world, time is evidence. The clock starts ticking the moment those blue lights turn on. Understanding the timeline of a traffic stop is one of the most sophisticated ways to protect your civil liberties. The Constitution protects you against unreasonable seizures, but it requires you to assert those rights. Police officers have a difficult job, and canines are valuable tools for finding contraband. But the Supreme Court has been clear. The ends do not justify the means. They can't break the rules of the Fourth Amendment just to see what a dog might find. Stay calm, be polite, but remain firm in your rights. Knowledge is your best defense. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure you subscribe for more plain English legal education. Stay safe and know your rights.